The mansion stood high on the hill, lights glowing in every corner, but inside it was filled with silence. Silence that wrapped around the billionaire like a heavy blanket he could never push away. He had everything people dreamed of, cars that shined, a garden so big it looked endless, and a fortune that could buy him the world. Yet every night when the workers went home and the laughter of the day died down, he was left with nothing but the echo of his own footsteps. The walls of the giant mansion were too wide, the rooms too empty, and the silence too loud. In that silence his eyes often found one person who stayed behind, his maid. She moved quietly from room to room, cleaning the already clean tables, wiping the glasses that sparkled already, and folding clothes that never had wrinkles. She worked late every night, sometimes long after midnight, and he often stood at the top of the staircase watching her, her hair tied back, her face pale from exhaustion, and her eyes always heavy as if carrying secrets too deep for anyone to see. He never asked what those secrets were. He never asked why she never laughed, why she never spoke more than a few words, because he was a man used to power, not to questions of the heart. The nights stretched on, and each one felt longer than the last. The silence pressed on him harder and harder. The empty dining table seemed to mock him with its 10 empty chairs. The echo of cutlery clinking against fine plates that no one touched filled his mind. He remembered how sometimes he would enter the kitchen at night to find her sitting on a small stool, her hands folded, eyes staring into nothing as if she were lost in a world far away. And when she noticed him, she would jump up quickly, pretend to busy herself with dishes or sweeping, as if hiding her thoughts from him. He wanted to say something, maybe ask if she was all right. But his pride chained his tongue. He was a billionaire, a man with power. He did not lower himself to the pain of others. But loneliness is a poison. It seeps slowly, it eats through pride. It makes the strongest man weak. And one night, when the rain hit against the windows and the storm roared outside, he walked through the halls unable to sleep. The silence was heavier than ever. His footsteps led him to the kitchen where she was again. Her clothes damp from the rain that dripped when she had closed the windows, her hair sticking to her face, her hands trembling as she held a cloth. She did not notice him at first. He stood watching her as the thunder shook the sky, and something inside him cracked. For the first time he saw not just a maid but a woman. A woman with eyes full of pain. A woman who carried a storm inside her just as heavy as the one outside, and he could not walk away. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. She turned startled, her lips parting to speak but no words came. The silence between them was louder than the thunder. His hand reached for hers, rough from work, cold from the night. She pulled back but too weakly, and in that moment he crossed a line he had never dared before. A line between master and servant, between power and silence, between loneliness and desire. The storm outside roared as if warning them. But he did not stop. He leaned closer, and she, tired, broken, unable to resist, let the moment carry her away. It was a mistake born from silence, a mistake born from emptiness, but once done it could never be undone. The mansion did not speak, the walls did not tell the secret. The thunder outside soon died, the rain slowed, but inside something irreversible had taken place. She sat afterwards, her eyes full of tears she tried to hide. He stood unable to speak, for the first time feeling something heavier than pride pressing on his chest. He wanted to say sorry, but the words refused to leave his lips. He wanted to ask her to forgive, but his pride once again held him back. She picked up her cloth and began wiping the table again as if nothing had happened, but her trembling hands gave away the truth. The billionaire turned and walked away, the silence of the mansion louder than ever before. Both their lives had changed in that one night, and though the world outside still saw him as untouchable, the truth hidden within the mansion was about to shape a future neither of them could escape. The morning sun rose over the giant mansion, golden light spilling across the marble floors. But inside the air was heavy and tense. The billionaire walked down the staircase slowly, his eyes scanning the living room, the dining hall, the kitchen. But she was not there. The maid who had been part of every morning routine was gone. No sound of footsteps, no clinking of dishes, no quiet presence moving in the background. He frowned, calling for her once, then twice, but only silence answered. He searched the kitchen, the garden, even the servants' quarters, but the bed was empty. Her clothes gone. The small box she kept in the corner missing too. He realized she had left, vanished into the night without a word. He stood frozen, his chest heavy with something he had never felt before, regret. He told himself it was for the best. She was only a maid, she did not belong in his world. But when he sat at the breakfast table, staring at the untouched food, the empty chair across from him screamed louder than his thoughts. Days passed and she never returned. Weeks went by, still no word. The mansion returned to its usual silence, but it was different now. It was sharper, cutting deeper into him with every passing night. He pretended not to care. He buried himself in meetings, parties, and deals. Yet at the end of each day he found himself pausing at the staircase, staring at the kitchen door, waiting for a glimpse of her tired eyes and quiet smile. But the door stayed closed. He asked his staff if anyone had seen her, but no one knew where she went. Whispers rose among the workers. Some said she had found another job. Some said she had gone to family far away. But none of it satisfied the ache inside him. He told himself again and again that it did not matter, but in truth it mattered more than anything. Months turned into years, and the memory of that stormy night haunted him like a shadow that never left. He sometimes saw women in the city who looked like her from the back, and his heart would pound, only for disappointment to follow when they turned and it was someone else. He avoided the kitchen at night. He avoided looking at the servants too closely, because every time he did, he was reminded of what he lost. Sometimes late at night, when sleep refused to come, he wondered if she hated him, if she cursed his name, if she told others what had happened. The thought made him restless, angry at himself, but helpless to change anything. One evening, years later, he drove through the city after a long meeting. The rain had just ended, streets wet and shining under the dim lights. He stopped at a traffic signal, his eyes wandering lazily, then suddenly froze. Near the corner of the street, under a broken lamp, two small children stood, their clothes torn, their hands stretched out begging for coins, their faces pale from hunger. But what struck him hardest was their eyes, wide, dark, and familiar, eyes that looked exactly like his own. His blood ran cold, his heart stopped for a moment. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to breathe. He could not look away. Every feature on those children screamed his blood, his reflection, his hidden truth standing right there on the street. Before he could react, a woman rushed forward, pulling the children close, wrapping them in her arms protectively. She looked up at him, and his world shattered. It was her, the maid he had lost years ago, her face thinner, her clothes worn, her eyes tired but burning with anger. She recognized him instantly and turned away, trying to lead the children away quickly. But he could not move, his body frozen, his heart beating in his ears louder than the city noise. The red light turned green. Cars behind him honked, but he sat still, staring at the sight that had destroyed every lie he had told himself. She was alive, and the children, his children, were with her, and he had just found them begging on the streets. The city noise faded in his ears as he sat frozen in his car, horns blaring behind him, but he did not hear. His eyes locked on the woman and the two children she clutched close to her chest. The maid he had once known now looked like a stranger carved by suffering. Her clothes were thin, her shoes broken, and her face carried lines that came from years of hardship. Yet what shook him more were the children, their little hands dirty, their eyes wide with hunger, and their faces carrying the unmistakable reflection of his own blood. He knew it at once. There was no denying, the same sharp jaw, the same dark eyes, the same look he had once seen in his mirror. The realization crushed him, his breath quickened, and for the first time in years the billionaire felt powerless. The light changed again and cars moved around him, drivers cursing, but he stayed still, watching her drag the children away into a dark alley. Finally he snapped out of the trance and pulled his car aside, stepping out into the wet street. Rain still dripping from rooftops, he followed their fading figures into the alley. The alley smelled of dampness and smoke, the ground wet and muddy. His polished shoes sank as he walked deeper. He could see her figure up ahead, bent low, speaking softly to the children as they huddled under a piece of cloth stretched between two broken walls. His chest tightened. He wanted to call out her name, but his voice stuck in his throat. He had faced boardrooms full of men. He had commanded wealth and respect. But now in front of her he felt smaller than ever. He took one slow step. The children noticed him first. Their little faces turned, and they stared with a mix of fear and curiosity. She turned too, and when her eyes met his, the silence was louder than thunder. She rose slowly, her hand clutching both children tightly as if he were a danger. Her lips trembled, not with weakness but with rage held back for too long. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off, her voice sharp, filled with years of pain. "What do you want here? Haven't you done enough?" The words struck him harder than any blow. He took a step forward, but she pulled the children closer, their eyes darting between them, sensing the tension. His mind scrambled for words. He wanted to say sorry. He wanted to say he never meant for this. But the excuses felt empty even before they left his mouth. He managed only a whisper. "Are they mine?" Her laughter was bitter, sharp, echoing in the damp alley. "Yours," she spat. "They were yours the moment they opened their eyes. Yours when they cried in hunger. Yours when I begged for work and no one would hire me because I carried your secret." She pointed at the children, trembling with fury. "And where were you then? In your golden mansion, surrounded by silence, while we begged on these streets." The children clung tighter to her dress, their faces pale. The billionaire felt his legs weaken, shame crawling through him. He had spent years pretending the past was behind him. But here it was, staring him in the face with the eyes of two innocent souls. He reached into his pocket, pulling out money, offering it with shaking hands. But she slapped it away, the notes falling into the muddy ground. "Do you think money can heal years of hunger? Do you think money can erase the nights I watched them shiver in the cold?" She shouted, tears brimming in her eyes but never falling. People in the alley began to notice. A few strangers paused, watching the scene unfold, whispering to each other, recognizing the rich man in his fine suit standing in the filth. His heart pounded as whispers grew. His secret was no longer hidden. The walls around his life were cracking. The billionaire felt cornered, exposed, yet powerless. He wanted to take a step closer, but her eyes warned him back, filled with fury and pain that no riches could calm. He opened his mouth to beg, but the sound of a phone camera clicking in the distance stopped him cold. Someone had recorded the scene, and soon the world would know. He glanced around. Faces staring, eyes judging, phones raised, and he realized his carefully built empire was about to crumble. The maid turned away, pulling the children deeper into the shadows of the alley, leaving him frozen, his heart torn, his mind spinning, and for the first time in his life, he felt the weight of true loss. Loss that could not be bought, loss that could not be hidden, and as the voices around him grew louder, he knew this was only the beginning of a storm that would destroy everything he thought was safe. The night air felt colder as he stood in the alley long after she had vanished with the children. His expensive suit clung damp against his body. But the chill that shook him came not from the weather but from the truth that had just broken him. The secret he had buried in silence had returned in the most brutal way, and now the world had seen. The clicking of cameras still echoed in his ears. He knew by morning the story would spread. Billionaire's hidden children found begging on the streets. His chest tightened as he imagined the headlines. His empire was built on respect and power. Yet both were slipping from his hands like water he could not hold. He climbed back into his car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. But he did not drive home. Instead he sat there, staring at the rain-soaked windshield, his reflection fractured by raindrops, his mind circling only one thought. Those children were his, and he had abandoned them without even knowing. He drove aimlessly through the city, past glowing billboards and crowded streets, but every face he saw turned into theirs. Every small child on the sidewalk reminded him of the twins, hungry, fragile, with his own blood in their veins. When he finally reached the mansion, the silence greeted him again, heavier than ever. He poured himself a drink, but the glass shook in his hand. He set it down untouched, pacing the empty halls. The house that once felt like a fortress now felt like a prison. Every corner reminded him of her, of that night, of what came after. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes he saw her face twisted with anger, her voice echoing. "Do you think money can heal years of hunger?" The words pierced deeper than any wound. The next morning the storm began. Newspapers screamed his shame. Photos of him standing in the filthy alley, her clutching the children. The captions cruel: "Billionaire exposed, secret family discovered." The world that once bowed to him now pointed fingers. His phone rang endlessly. Business partners demanding answers. Board members threatening to step down. His name dragged through mud on television. Some called him a monster. Others called him a hypocrite. Reporters camped outside his gates, shouting questions through megaphones. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. And through it all he sat in his study, hands clenched, unable to form a plan. For the first time in his life control had slipped from him. Power had left his hands, and the silence of the mansion mocked him. By evening he could not take it anymore. He returned to the city, searching the streets, driving through alleys, his guards trailing behind. But he did not care about his image now. He only wanted to find her, to see the children again, to do something, anything that might fix the disaster. After hours of searching, he found them near the old train station. The twins huddled against the wall, she sitting beside them with tired eyes. He stepped forward, but she saw him and rose quickly, blocking him with her body. "Stay away," she hissed, her voice sharp but trembling. People nearby stopped to watch, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. He begged her softly, "Please, let me help them. Let me take them somewhere safe." Her laugh was bitter again. "Safe," she whispered. "Safe was when I worked in your house and thought life might get better. Safe was when I carried them inside me and prayed you would care. Safe was the dream I buried when I realized you never would. You want to take them now, when the world already knows, when your empire is crumbling." She shook her head. "You are not here for them. You are here for yourself." The twins looked at him with innocent confusion. They did not yet understand the weight of the storm around them, but they could feel the fear in their mother's grip. He reached out his hand slowly, not with money this time, but empty, open, shaking. "Please," he whispered again. But she turned her back, gathering the children close, walking into the dark corners of the station, leaving him standing under the flickering lights, surrounded by strangers who whispered and recorded. The billionaire felt the walls of his world collapse piece by piece. He realized this battle was no longer about wealth or reputation. It was about trust, and that was something he had destroyed long ago. He could not buy it. He could not command it. He could only stand in the ruins of his choices, watching the only family he ever truly had walk away from him again. The night at the station stayed in his mind like a wound that would not close. He returned to his mansion, but it no longer felt like a home. The walls pressed down on him, the silence louder than ever. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her back turned against him, the twins clutching her dress as they walked away. His heart burned with shame, but also with a desperate need to make things right. For days he tried to focus on business, but his name had already been dragged through mud. Investors pulled away. Clients whispered that his empire was built on lies. He sat in boardrooms where once people listened to his every word. Now they looked at him with doubt, some even with disgust. The newspapers printed his face daily. Billionaire abandons secret twins. And though he told himself he could survive the financial storm, he knew in his heart the real storm was losing them, losing the only chance to repair what he had broken. One evening he went back to the city, disguised in plain clothes, no guards, no luxury cars, just himself, searching the alleys, the markets, the corners where the poor slept. Hours passed until he found them again near a soup kitchen. The twins stood in line with other hungry children, their small hands holding empty bowls. The sight tore through him, his chest aching in a way money could not cure. He walked closer, ignoring the stares of others. And when she saw him, her face hardened. She pulled the twins away from the line, glaring at him with fury. "What are you doing here again?" she demanded, her voice sharp. He swallowed his pride, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I came for them, not for me. I want to help." She shook her head. "You want to ease your guilt. You never wanted them when it mattered. You want them now because the world is watching." He lowered his gaze, her words cutting deep, yet he did not leave. Instead, he knelt down in front of the children, their eyes wide with confusion, and for the first time in his life the billionaire who once ruled boardrooms was on his knees, whispering softly, "I am sorry." The twins stared at him, too young to understand but old enough to feel. One of them tilted his head, his voice small. "Are you really our father?" The question shattered him. His throat tightened. Tears burned his eyes, but he forced the words out. "Yes, I am, and I failed you." The crowd around them murmured, some recording, others watching in silence. She pulled the children back, her anger trembling with the weight of years. "Do not play with their hearts," she hissed. "They do not need your promises, they need truth. They need someone who will not disappear." He looked at her, his voice steady now. "I will not disappear again. I cannot erase the past, but I can give them a future." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You think a future can be built on broken trust. You think food and clothes can heal wounds of the soul." He said nothing more, only stood slowly, his eyes on the twins, whispering again, "I will not give up on you." He left that night, but something had changed. For the first time she had listened, even if with anger. For the first time the children had looked at him not with fear but with a question. And that question gave him a spark of hope. He returned to the mansion and began changing. He donated to orphanages, opened shelters, built schools in poor neighborhoods, not for headlines, not for reputation, but for them, hoping one day they would see his actions and know he was trying. Yet deep down he feared it would never be enough. For every night the image haunted him, her face hardened by pain, the twins clutching her torn dress, walking away into the shadows while he stood alone in his empty world, knowing the fight for forgiveness had only just begun. The days turned into weeks and the billionaire carried the weight of his shame everywhere he went. The newspapers still shouted his name. The whispers in society circles still cut through him like knives. But none of that hurt as much as the silence between him and the twins. Every night he sat alone in his vast study, staring at pictures of them secretly captured by reporters, small figures in ragged clothes, always clinging to her side. He thought about the nights they must have gone to sleep hungry, about the winters they must have shivered without blankets, about the times they must have cried and only she was there to comfort them. The guilt was endless. But with guilt also came determination. He could not change the past, but he could fight for their future. He began showing up near the places she visited, not to force himself into their lives, but to watch from a distance, to make sure they were safe. Sometimes he left food quietly, sometimes blankets, sometimes money pressed into the hands of strangers who then gave it to her. Though she always knew it was from him, she never thanked him, she never spoke to him. But she did not throw it away anymore, and that gave him the faintest hope. One night he saw her leaving the shelter with the twins, the children holding small loaves of bread, their faces tired, and for the first time in weeks he stepped forward boldly. She froze when she saw him, her eyes narrowing. He raised his hands in peace. "I do not want to fight," he said softly. "I just want to talk." She looked around. People were staring again, her pride heavy on her shoulders. But the children tugged at her dress. Curious, one of them whispered, "Mama, let him speak." Her heart trembled, her face hardened again. But she allowed him a few minutes. They stood in the dim light of a broken street lamp, rain dripping around them. He spoke slowly. "I failed you once, and I failed them before they could even know me. But I am not here to erase what happened. I am here to ask for a chance to do something right." She crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "And what do you call right? To drag them into your golden cage, to raise them under your name so people will forget your shame." He shook his head, his voice firm. "No, I want to raise them because they are mine, because they deserve better, because I want to be their father." Her eyes glistened, her lips trembled, but she forced herself to stand strong. "You think fatherhood is about giving them toys and soft beds," she whispered. "Fatherhood is about being there when they cry, being there when they fall, being there when the world shuts its doors. Where were you then?" He had no answer. His silence spoke for him. But then one of the twins stepped closer, small hands clutching his suit sleeve, eyes filled with innocence. "Sir, are you really our father?" The question, repeated, cut through him again. He knelt down, tears finally breaking through. "Yes, I am, and I am sorry. I cannot give you the years I missed. But I can give you every year ahead. I will fight for you. I will never leave again." The other twin looked at their mother, confused, torn. She bit her lip, her heart breaking. She pulled them both back quickly, her voice shaking with anger. "Do not trick them with your words. They are not pieces on your board. They are my children, mine, and I will protect them." She dragged them away into the night, leaving him kneeling on the wet street. But this time her steps were slower, her shoulders heavier, and he knew her wall was beginning to crack. He returned home that night and sat alone again. But this time something felt different. He had seen the twins look at him not with fear, but with longing. A spark of connection had passed, and though she fought it, he knew the bond of blood was there, waiting. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands still trembling, whispering to the silence of the mansion, "I will not give up, not again. This is only the beginning." Outside the storm raged, and inside his heart a fire grew stronger. The fire of a man who had lost everything but still had something worth fighting for, his children, his blood. His last chance at redemption. The days after their last meeting felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. The billionaire tried to focus on repairing his empire, but his mind stayed chained to the image of the twins. Their innocent faces, their small voices calling him father. The world around him grew louder, the media still tore at him. The board of his company threatened to remove him, business partners abandoned him, yet none of it mattered as much as the thought of losing them again. Every night he drove through the city searching for them. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of their small figures near the soup kitchen, sometimes near the train station. But each time she pulled them away, her eyes filled with fury and fear. Still he returned, determined not to vanish again. He left food where they could find it, Arranged medicine when one of them coughed badly. Always from a distance, always in silence, and slowly the children began to notice his shadow following them. They whispered about him, wondering why he kept coming back. Their mother remained firm, warning them not to trust him, yet the cracks in her resolve deepened each day. One cold evening, as wind cut through the streets, he found them huddled by a fire in a barrel, the twins shivering in their mother's arms. He could not hold back. He stepped forward carrying blankets. She rose immediately, her body shielding them. "I told you to stay away," she snapped, but her voice trembled as she looked at the blankets. He lowered his hands. No words of pride, no excuses, only a soft plea. "Please, let them be warm tonight." Her lips tightened. Her pride wrestled with her. Children suffering. Finally she snatched the blankets from his hands, wrapping the twins quickly, her eyes burning with silent anger. But she did not push him away this time. The children's faces lit up with relief as the warmth wrapped around them, and for the first time they looked at him with gratitude instead of fear. His chest ached at the sight. He wanted to step closer but stayed still, not to break the fragile moment. Finally she whispered bitterly, "You think this makes up for years of hunger?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it makes up for nothing, but it is a start." Her silence was answer enough. She turned away, holding the twins close, but they kept looking back at him, their small eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the man who had appeared in their lives like a ghost from the past. He walked back to his car, but for the first time he felt a thin thread of hope tying him to them. The next morning his world shook again. Headlines screamed louder than ever. Video footage had surfaced. The clip of him kneeling in front of the twins under the street lamp spread everywhere. Some mocked him, some pitied him. But all eyes were now on his hidden family. Reporters swarmed the places they lived. Cameras hunted them. The children cried under the constant flash, and she exploded with rage, storming up to him one night when he tried to find them, her voice breaking. "This is your fault. You brought the world down on us. We cannot breathe. We cannot sleep. My children are chased like criminals because of you." He lowered his head, her fury justified, but he answered with a calm voice, "Then let me protect them. Let me take them away from the cameras, from the noise. Give me the chance to shield them." She shook her head violently. Trust is not built on fear, and stormed away, yet her steps faltered, her shoulders heavy. That night he sat in his study staring at the fire, the thought echoing again and again. Trust is not built on fear. He realized the fight ahead was not just against the world. It was against the wall she had built around her heart, a wall of pain, betrayal, and years of struggle. He knew it would not break with money or gifts. It would break only if he proved himself, day after day, step after step. So he made a vow in that silence. A vow that no matter how many times she pushed him away, no matter how many times the world mocked him, he would not step back. He would stand there until she saw he was not leaving, until the twins saw he was truly theirs, until his actions spoke louder than his mistakes. And with that vow burning in his chest, he looked out at the dark night and whispered to himself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The vow he made in the silence of his study began to shape his every step. The billionaire no longer cared for the board meetings, the parties, or the gossip of the elite. His eyes were fixed only on the streets where his children lived. Each day he followed them from a distance, watching as they walked to shelters, as they begged for coins, as they clung to their mother's hands in fear of the cameras that still hunted them. His heart broke a little more each time, yet he refused to walk away. Slowly the city began to notice. The same man who once ruled from towers of glass now stood in muddy alleys, bringing food, building fires for strangers, sitting with the poor and listening to their stories. Some mocked him, saying it was only a show. Others whispered that maybe he was changing. But for him it was never about them. It was about her and the twins, about proving through his actions that he was not the same man who had abandoned them. He built shelters where families like hers could sleep safely, opened kitchens where no child would go hungry, and though she never said a word of thanks, he saw her eyes soften when the twins ate warm food without fear. One evening the storm broke harder. A crowd of reporters cornered her near the market, their flashes blinding, their questions cruel. The twins cried and clung to her, and she screamed at them to leave. But the cameras only pushed closer. Then suddenly he appeared, shoving through the crowd, his voice loud. "Enough," he roared, his arms shielding them. The reporters froze, stunned by the fury in his eyes, and for the first time he did not hide. He faced the cameras. "Yes, they are mine," he shouted. They are my children and I will protect them with everything I have. The world can take my fortune, it can take my name, but it will not touch them. The crowd gasped, flashes exploded, and in that moment the story changed, no longer whispers and rumors, but truth spoken by his own mouth. He turned to her, his voice low, "Come with me. Let me keep you safe." She stared at him, stunned by his public confession, her pride and her fear battling in her heart. She wanted to refuse, yet the trembling hands of her children pulled at her dress, their small voices pleading, "Mama, please, we are scared," and her resistance cracked. That night he brought them to a safe house far from the city, guarded and hidden, not the golden cage of his mansion but a small place where no cameras could reach. He gave them space, never crossing the line, never forcing his presence, only watching as the twins slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Tears burned his eyes as he realized how simple their needs were: warmth, safety, food, things he had taken for granted while they had begged for survival. She sat in the corner, her eyes still full of suspicion, her arms crossed, her voice cold. "This does not mean I forgive you. This does not mean I trust you." He nodded quietly, "I know, but I will wait for the day you do." Her lips trembled, her heart torn, and she turned away. But deep inside she felt the smallest spark of something she thought had died long ago. The possibility that maybe he meant his words this time, maybe he had changed. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breaths of the twins in the next room. The sound steadier than any music, more precious than any fortune, and he swore silently to himself that he would never let them suffer again. No matter what it cost, no matter how long it took, he would carry the weight of his past until his last breath if it meant giving them a future. And as the night stretched on, he realized that the fight for forgiveness was no longer about saving his name, it was about saving his soul, and the only way to do that was to never walk away from them again. The days at the safe house passed slowly. The twins began to laugh more, their small feet running across the floor, their voices filling the rooms with a warmth he had not felt in years. Every smile from them was like a light piercing through the darkness of his guilt. Yet she remained distant, watching him with wary eyes, her heart torn between protecting her children and acknowledging the changes she saw in him. Sometimes she caught him sitting alone, staring at the twins as they slept, his expression heavy with regret and longing. Other times she found him quietly fixing broken chairs, cooking simple meals, or cleaning floors, tasks a man of his wealth had never touched. But he did them without complaint, and though her pride wanted to dismiss it, her heart whispered that perhaps he was no longer the same man who had abandoned her. Still, the wound of the past ran deep, and trust was not easily built. Each time he tried to speak with her, she kept her answers short. Each time he reached out, she pulled away, and yet she did not leave. Not this time, not with the twins so calm and safe. Outside, however, the storm raged louder. The world still tore at his reputation. His empire crumbled. His wealth slipped away as investors fled. Lawsuits piled on his desk, and the mansion on the hill stood cold and empty. But none of it broke him as much as the thought of losing them again. For the first time he understood what it meant to have something greater than fortune. The twins were his legacy, his redemption, his last chance at meaning. One evening the safe house shook with tension when a group of reporters tracked them down, their voices shouting, their cameras flashing through the windows. Panic filled the room as the twins clung to their mother. Crying, she turned to him, her face pale, her voice sharp. "This is what I feared. This is why I cannot trust you. You bring the world down on us." He grabbed her shoulders gently, his eyes burning with urgency. "Trust me this once. I will protect you." Before she could reply, he stormed outside, his guards following, and faced the swarm of reporters head-on. His voice thundered across the night, "Leave this place. These children are not your story. They are my family, and I will destroy anyone who dares harm them again." The force in his words shocked even the reporters. Some lowered their cameras, others backed away, and slowly the crowd dissolved, leaving him standing alone in the rain, soaked but unbroken. When he came back inside, the twins rushed to him, their small arms wrapping around his legs, their voices trembling. "Don't leave us, Papa." The word struck him like lightning. For the first time they had called him father without doubt. His knees weakened. He sank down and held them close, tears streaming down his face. He whispered again and again, "I will never leave, never again." She stood watching, her chest tight, her heart breaking at the sight. The man who once turned his back on them now looked like someone who would give his life to protect them. For a moment her anger wavered. For a moment her walls cracked. But still she whispered to herself, "Can I trust him? Can I risk believing again?" She turned away, wiping her eyes. But deep inside she knew something was changing. Something she could not stop. The bond of blood and the persistence of his repentance were pulling her closer to a truth she had fought to deny. That night the billionaire sat awake long after the twins had fallen asleep, their small breath steady, their hands still clutching his shirt as if afraid he might vanish. He looked at them, then at her sitting silently by the window, and he realized the battle was not yet over. Forgiveness was still far, but he had taken one step closer, and for the first time in years he felt a fragile sense of hope. Hope that maybe one day the woman he had wronged would believe him, and the children he had lost would truly accept him. Hope that the broken family standing in the ruins of his mistakes might finally rise together. Stronger than the storm that had once torn them apart. The final days in the safe house felt like a test. The billionaire woke each morning to the sight of the twins smiling in their sleep, their small hands wrapped around his fingers as if afraid he might vanish, and every night he sat in silence across from her, watching the flicker of doubt and pain in her eyes. The storm outside still roared, the newspapers still printed his shame, his empire continued to crumble piece by piece, but none of it mattered compared to the fragile world inside those walls. Here it was not about money, it was about trust, and trust was something he had to earn with every breath. He cooked their meals, carried them on his shoulders, read them stories with a voice that trembled, and tucked them under blankets. Each small act chipping away at the years of distance. The twins began to laugh more freely, their voices ringing like music through the rooms. Sometimes they would call him Papa without hesitation, and each time it pierced him with both joy and sorrow. Joy because he finally heard what he had always longed for. Sorrow because he knew how much he had missed. She watched quietly, her heart torn, remembering the nights she had begged for bread, the days she had shielded them from hunger, the hours she had carried the weight of the world alone, and she wondered if it was possible to forgive. One evening the twins fell asleep early, their faces peaceful in the glow of the fire. He sat near them, staring at the flames, and she finally spoke after a long silence, her voice low but sharp. "You think this changes everything. You think because they call you Papa and because you feed them now, the past disappears." He turned to her, his eyes heavy with pain. "No," he said softly, "the past will never disappear. It lives inside you, inside me, inside them. But the future is still open, and I want to fight for it." She clenched her fists, tears forming. "You don't know what it cost me. The hunger, the shame, the nights when they cried and I had nothing to give." He lowered his head, his voice breaking. "I know I cannot take that pain from you, but I will carry it with you now. For as long as I live." Her lips trembled, her walls shaking. She turned away quickly, whispering, "I don't know if I can believe you." He stood, taking a careful step closer, not touching her, only saying quietly, "You don't have to believe my words. Believe my actions. I will never leave, not again." Days passed, and the world outside began to shift. Some mocked him still, but others started to see a different man. His name no longer stood only for power and arrogance but also for humility and sacrifice. The same cameras that once chased them now showed him carrying food into shelters, holding sick children, working alongside the poor, not for show, but because his heart had changed. Slowly the whispers turned into murmurs of respect. Yet the only eyes he wanted to convince were hers. One night she found him asleep on the floor beside the twins, their heads resting on his arms, his face softened by exhaustion. Tears pricked her eyes as she saw how different he had become, not the cold master of the mansion, but a man stripped bare, holding only the love he had for the children. She realized then that forgiveness was not a gift she was giving him. It was a gift she was giving herself, the chance to let go of bitterness, to let her children grow without the shadow of hate. When morning came she spoke to him, her voice still guarded but softer than before. "You may stay in their lives, but if you break this promise again, I will walk away forever and you will never see them." He looked at her with steady eyes, his voice firm. "I will not break it, not again." And this time she saw truth in his face. Truth born not from wealth or power but from loss and repentance. The twins woke and ran to him, their laughter filling the house, and for the first time she did not pull them away. She let them embrace him, let them call him Papa, let the bond between them grow. The billionaire felt something he had never known before, not the hollow pride of success, not the shallow thrill of riches, but the weight and warmth of family, and as he held the twins close, He knew the mansion on the hill could remain empty, his fortune could vanish, the world could forget his name. But here in this fragile circle of trust, he had finally found the only treasure worth keeping.